Hey, what's up? It's Jared with State of Tech, and today we're going to talk about the iPad versus the iPad Pro, what the different features are, why you would choose one over the other, and just kind of answer some of those general questions that I keep getting asked, because earlier this year in March, Apple announced the iPad, and the iPad came out, and people were like, okay, what about the iPad Pro? Because this is about the same size, and so what are the differences here? And so this is kind of a long overdue video because it is several months later, and I do know that Apple will most likely make some sort of update to the iPad Pro later this year. So let's talk about that and some of the features. So I have both the iPad and the iPad Pro right here. This is my iPad Pro. It's outfitted the way that I have it, with the keyboard and a cover on the back, because I'm constantly like tossing this into my laptop bag, and I just want it to be protected. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock the displays here, and we are going to talk about some of the differences between these two devices. So the iPad and the iPad Pro look really close to the same, just without knowing what you're looking at, I guess you could say. The iPad Pro has a little bit bigger of a display. It has that true tone display with that wider color gamut, that 120 hertz refresh, which is fantastic, especially if you are an artist, you're using that Apple Pencil, or of course maybe you like some games and stuff, maybe you're playing some Fortnite on your iPad and you want that faster refresh rate, you're going to get that out of this. Not that the experience is bad on the regular iPad, it's just not going to be as fresh and as fluid. And it's hard to tell watching this video, because of course this video is being downsampled for the internet, but in looking at the refresh rate here, this is silky smooth over here, and this is kind of jittery. You might even be able to tell the difference in the video. So of course with the higher refresh rate, you're gonna get more precision out of your Apple Pencil. That's just the glass and everything is just a little bit better on the iPad Pro than the regular iPad. So the overall experience is gonna be a little bit more professional on the iPad Pro. Even though the iPad came out more recently, it doesn't necessarily mean that Apple built this out of the top of the line specs. So I like to think of the iPad Pro as like the iPhone 8, I guess you could say, because it doesn't have the notch. So more like an iPhone 8, and this iPad Pro, or this regular iPad, is more like an iPhone SE, or the iPhone SE, as I like to call it. So with that said, let's talk about some of the other features. Of course, the iPad Pro has the quad speakers, so the sound output's going to be a lot better. It's just going to be all around better. I'll cut to an example right here. So the iPad Pro has those quad speakers and puts out a lot more sound than the regular iPad. So of course the speakers in the regular iPad are smaller, they're more compact, they're not quad big speakers to put out a ton of sound like the iPad, and that definitely represents itself in the numbers we just saw. The iPad Pro has the A10X chip, which is much more powerful than the A10 chip, which is in the iPad. Even though it doesn't sound like it's a big difference, it really is a pretty big difference as far as performance goes. Now you're not going to see really a big difference just kind of within one app versus the other, but in some of those more intense games, or if you're multitasking, dual screen, kind of going with the two split screen here, and have some kind of more heavier applications open, you might start to notice a little bit. And that also is going to be represented in the fact that there's 4 gigabytes of RAM in the iPad Pro versus 2 in the iPad, the regular iPad. 2 is definitely more than enough to get a lot done, even in some of the more demanding apps that are available on the iPad. But the iPad Pro definitely has more than enough there, which is going to help you get through those heavier tasks without any lag. Of course, the battery life is also better in the iPad Pro than the regular iPad, though the battery life in the regular iPad is pretty fantastic as well. It's definitely nothing to get upset about. So the cameras, even though I'm not a big fan of like iPad photography, whenever somebody's using an iPad to take a picture or shoot a video, it's frustrating to me, as I'm sure it is you, but the cameras are much better in the iPad Pro. I mean, if you look at the camera on the back of the regular iPad, as you can see here, it just has that little tiny camera hole, kind of reminiscent of like an iPhone 4 or something, maybe even earlier. To me, it kind of looks like the camera on the original iPhone, versus the iPad Pro's camera here, which is much larger. It has a raised area, it also has a flash, so you're gonna get a lot more out of this. So I mean, if you're doing something like video conferencing or something like that, or maybe you're wanting to take advantage of the expanded FaceTime functionality that's going to come out in the next version in iOS 12, it's definitely the iPad Pro is going to give you a better overall experience there. So the smart connector that is on the base or on the side of the base, I guess depending on how you're holding the iPad, that allows you to connect to keyboards, that's non-existent on the regular iPad, which means that you're not going to be able to connect an Apple keyboard to it. It just doesn't have that smart connector. And that's fine, I guess. I mean, there are a ton of really good Bluetooth keyboards out there, and a lot of keyboard cases that are probably even cheaper than the Apple one. However, I just absolutely love the Apple keyboard that they produced for the iPad. It's fantastic. I've bought it for every iPad that I've had since the iPad keyboard, since Apple made a keyboard, and it's just been fantastic. I love just the feel. It's a delight to type on. A lot of the keyboard cases that are out there aren't that good. I mean, there are a couple of good ones, but they're usually pretty bulky. You can, of course, any Bluetooth keyboard is going to connect to your regular iPad here, so that's not a problem. You're just not going to get Apple's connected devices. And in calling it a smart connector on the side, I don't know of anything else that you can connect to it other than the Apple keyboard. So as far as I know, its only use is to connect an Apple keyboard. It doesn't have any other use. So you might not be missing out on too much there. I guess another side note of that is that the keyboard is powered by the iPad as well, so you're not going to have to worry about powering and charging both a Bluetooth keyboard and your iPad to make sure that, of course, those things are working. Faster Touch ID, the newest and greatest Touch ID is in the iPad Pro versus the regular iPad here, which has older Touch ID technology. It still unlocks pretty fast, but it's just not as snappy as the iPad Pro. So other things to consider is the fact that you can get the iPad Pro in much larger storage options. So of course you can get up to 512 gigs in your iPad Pro, which is fantastic if you're a power user, someone who's going to store a lot of documents, a lot of stuff on the iPad. Perhaps you want to use this instead of a computer or toting a laptop around. The iPad Pro is definitely a contender in that space, and I have my own thoughts on whether or not it's a true contender to a laptop. But the regular iPad I see is more of an iPad that you would have around the house, that you would use for the occasional web browsing, perhaps some light gaming. The kids may use it and whatnot. I mean, this is the iPad that you would just have around. This is the iPad that is truly a pro iPad. What it stacks up against as far as pro means, it's really left to be determined. But with that said, the pro features are here. The keyboard case, all of that stuff, the better camera, the higher refresh rate, the longer battery life, the higher storage amounts, the more RAM, the better processor, all those things are in the iPad Pro, so you're going to get that better longevity and performance out of your iPad Pro in more demanding situations. So for me, I think that you could definitely, if you're not interested in those high-end things, you could get two of these technically for the price of one of these, depending on the storage amount that you're looking for. So if you're wanting something for your kids or something for around the house, the regular iPad is going to be more than enough for you. If you're wanting something for higher levels of productivity and you want a more premium device, the iPad Pro definitely stands on its own, even though it came out a little bit before this iPad. So I hope that answers some of your questions about iPad versus iPad Pro. If you have any other questions, ask them down in the comment section below. I'd love to answer them. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you think that the iPad Pro is worth the extra cost? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your argument on that. So share that with me down in the comment section below. Click that subscribe or that follow button to follow us here on State of Tech and get new videos when we put them out. And I hope to see you back here soon. Take care.